Howdy, all of you delicious people. I am here today to view Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. So, firstly, we have another new released movie where the villain has a very hard to pronounce name. Garaka Gra. Is that his name? I hope it is, because I'm going to go on and probably talk about it a handful of times within this review. But yeah, we have to have a goofy villain name that probably no one is going to be able to pronounce or no one is going to care to. It's fine with me because I'm going to go on and just make fun of it because I can. So, for those of you that had clicked on this and had not gone on to see any of the other Ghostbusters content that I have done upon this channel, I feel that Frozen Empire, so much more so than any of the other Ghostbusters films, I would need to go on and explain my fandom. I am, of course, to be a Ghostbusters die-hard fan. That doesn't mean I go on and I see every single Ghostbusters film and I thumbs up every single one of it because it's a Ghostbusters thing. No. Especially if you've gone on to see any of the other reviews that I've done, it's not always going to be that way. I am very picky, and so on and so forth. So, with that said, really, my fandom is to state that I've possibly seen the original two Ghostbusters films hundreds, if not like 1,000 times, and so on and so forth. I've possibly stated that a lot. But then I would also go on and say I have seen Real Ghostbusters and Extreme Ghostbusters episodes. Maybe not every single episode of those shows, because even more so recently, I'd seen Real Ghostbusters episodes that I had never seen before, and they had been brand new to me. I'm like, wow, because I was able to go on an app and be able to watch Real Ghostbusters cartoons or episodes again, and there were certain ones where I was like, I've never seen this episode before, and it was great, and I enjoyed it. So at some point, I hope to eventually want to do more Ghostbusters content and cover that, but I don't know. I promise so many things and I never deliver on everything. So that's the depressing part of me. But anyways, I would also state there was a video game of the Ghostbusters that went on to get remastered. That video game to me was so good that I felt that it was the the third movie in my eyes to the other two. Because the story was so good as far as comedic stuff, and also it was to reflect on all the old stuff, but then bring in something new. So, yeah, definitely I would recommend for people to see a playthrough of the remastered Ghostbusters video game because it's actually really good. And so, with that all said, the reason why I'm stating all this is for the video game of which that I just talked about, it feels like they stole certain things from that and put that in Frozen Empire. And I also feel that and I think a lot of people will state this also, that Frozen Empire feels like an extended Real Ghostbusters episode. So it's basically a movie of kind of what you've seen in the past. If you've ever seen the Real Ghostbusters or Extreme Ghostbusters, you'll get the nostalgia of that. Because really that's what kind of Ghostbusters consistently tries to do with you. It plugs at the nostalgia strings because that's all it really has. And so, with that said, I feel that I have to go on and compare Afterlife and Frozen Empire, I would probably have gone on and stated that Afterlife is probably the worst Ghostbusters movie that I have ever seen. And that would even have to go on and be compared to the 2016 women's Ghostbusters movie that I actually feel is better than Afterlife, simply because it goes on and it's actually a team Ghostbusters film and it does what it's supposed to be, and it's a Ghostbusters movie. It's what it does. So, even though it's a 3D attempt at a Ghostbusters movie, which I thought was stupid. And after saying that, I feel I need to compare Afterlife and Frozen Empire. I feel that Frozen Empire is a passable film. Not by very much, but I would go on and feel that there's more interesting things going on in this movie than there is Afterlife, because Afterlife I felt was a very boring film. Frozen Empire is just a boring film, especially with there's like an hour of the film where I'm like, okay, you guys are just kind of putting in just a lot of stuff just to stretch out the time. And really, besides like the very beginning of the film, which is this exciting action thing, then we kind of have to wait this really long slog till we get like the ending, which is like 20 to 30 minutes left of the film. So we have like maybe the first 10 minutes of that opening action sequence, and then the 40 or the 30 20 or 30 minutes of a big action film at the end, and we just have this hour that is just a bunch of stuff that they just kind of put in a Ghostbusters film to make a story. And there's certain cherry picking stuff that I can take from Frozen Empire and really like that they did. And there's certain things where I can say it's like, man, that was just a really dumb idea, and no one is going to like that at all. No one is going to like uh, the certain characters that they added to this film and had them have some importance to this story, when really it seems that these kind of Afterlife franchise films are all carried by Phoebe, the Spangler, young 15-year-old character in this movie, who is having to carry this entire film on her back. Because it still feels that way in this film. And here's the thing. I really don't like that this is a Ghostbusters family film instead of a Ghostbusters team film. We get a lot of parenting crap in this film that obviously I want nothing to do with. And not only that, it seems that every single one of these characters in this entire movie, a lot of people would say that we did not have enough time with. Uh, Even though you were to probably say it's like, well, so and so character had this and this and this. Yeah, but pretty much everybody like didn't have good enough like stories within this one film, because there's so many of them that you have to kind of like, well, we gotta spend like 5 minutes on what Ray is going on and doing right now, because he's kind of like the real leader of the Ghostbusters, the OG ones, and he's kind of telling the more rookie ones kind of what to do. And then we have kind of Winston kind of popping in here and there to tell uh, the newer Ghostbusters what the latest equipment and advances and better stuff that they have. Because man, when you get to the part of the film where you have them talk about like the possessed objects or the cursed items, you're like, okay, this is really cool. I really enjoyed this part of the film, and I can enjoy this seemingly new uh, environment that we are going to be in this Frozen Empire film. Trying to be cryptic because this isn't quite the spoiler part yet, but really, uh, eventually we will get there. So, when I say go to the theater and see Frozen Empire, I honestly really have a hard time wanting to tell people to go to a theater and see this because people are going to have a wide variety of opinions upon this film specifically. So, really, if you can go on and see it conveniently, you would probably be much better off. Really, I can go on and suggest a couple of apps that you can be able to not only go on and see Frozen Empire for absolutely free, and then just think like, okay, well, I really actually did like this movie. I'll watch it again in theaters, and maybe then you'll have a variety of different opinions upon this film while seeing it the second time, and maybe you'll hate it more or you'll love it more. Who knows? But with that said, there are two apps that I can recommend you going on and seeing Frozen Empire as well as any of the other Ghostbusters content. Uh, as far as the real Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters, because they should have a lot of that stuff available there from the two apps that I'm going to list to you. Firstly, there is an app that I've been using fairly recently called Coma. Coma. That should possibly have the real Ghostbusters episodes if you want to go ahead and check those out because the real Ghostbusters is a really good cartoon. Extreme Ghostbusters is a really good cartoon also, but it's kind of the sequel of Real Ghostbusters. So watch a couple of episodes of Real Ghostbusters and then go on and watch Extreme Ghostbusters, and you're welcome. Uh, you may also be able to see Frozen Empire there also, or I will give you another app that I've been using for a much longer bit of time called Zelliphonic. Zelivonic. Zelliphonic. I had to think of how to spell that because it's been a while since I've had to go on and do a review. So, really, yeah, like if really, if Afterlife was an awful film, I would say that Frozen Empire is just kind of like I want to say it's like bad okay. It's like bad okay because there's bits of it where I'm just kind of like I really just I don't like I still have a problem like completely enjoying these more recent Ghostbuster films, but at least there are more intriguing things going on in this movie than there is Afterlife. So with that said, I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna pause this. I'm going to get my cast list out. This time around, I am not going to have like a full on first scene bit of this movie. I think what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to like dissect parts and pieces of this film and just kind of explain how I felt about them rather than go on and cuz I think there's like a good hour of this movie that I think just has a lot of just side mission things going on and I feel like I should just go on and just kind of for bit like explain those and just kind of talk about how I felt about them. Rather than going on and just like explaining scene for scene what happens in this whole entire movie. I think I'd just be better off doing it that way. And for those of you that want a scene for scene review, my apologies. Maybe at some point I will rationalize wanting to do this over and doing a different kind of review of this, scene for scene and whatever, what have you. Because a lot of you who have gone on to see my other reviews may, of course, want that kind of thing, a perfect symmetry of scene for scene dissection. My bad. Anyways, I will be back in a second. All right, cast list. I don't have scene for scene, so that's how we're doing it. So we really have in the very beginning of this movie, and we're going into full on spoilers. I'm not doing the countdown things anymore, saying spoiler time, it's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing any of that. Even though I just did it, we're not doing it anymore. I think I'm just going to go on and just like, hey, we're going to get to a point where I'm going to just start talking in spoilers. So, yeah. I know everybody probably loved it because that's the goofy things that I always go on and do, but a lot of times I forget all that and I'm just kind of like, meh, let's talk about this film. So I think when I kind of like go through the part of the movies, like I feel like there's gonna have to be like a point where I'm like, okay, I enjoy this, and here's what I hated, and I enjoy this, and here's what I hated. So the opening scene where we have this kind of flashback of the firehouse, and we actually have the firemen in the firehouse rushing out to some fire because they see that a door has smoke upon it. And we have the firemen, and they put their hand on the door, and they realize, like, oh my god, this door is frozen. And the guy, I think, loses his hand, or they kind of rip the hand off. I don't remember exactly how that plays out. But then they roll into this area where everybody is frozen, and I'm like, okay, so is the ghost out of the little ball that they had him like kind of ghost trapped in, or did somebody go on and realize that they needed the trap to like freeze this ghost? Nothing is really explained. But so we have these men going into this, I think it's like some hotel or some locale of sorts. Like I don't remember exactly what this locale was. It could have been the Sedgwick Hotel, like in the other Ghostbusters movie. Who knows or cares? So the so the firemen come in here, and they're strolling in, and they make their way to a person who they assume is also frozen and dead also. And so the guys just start touching on this person and come to find out that this person who is to be a descendant of the fire master, which I think was the lamest thing of this movie. You know what? I really want to love uh Nanjiani, the comedian, the stand-up comedian, but man, does he just do a lot of he just does a lot of movies that I don't like. Except for possibly that Uber movie. That movie was that was okay. Um, but God, Nanjiani, like you did Eternals, and I'm like, man, the movie just freaking sucked. Like he could have had fun doing that role, but the movie just sucked. It just did. And like he is the worst part of this movie, easily. No one would probably go on and say that he is the best part of this film or even an enjoyable part of this film because it's not really a Ghostbusters thing. It's just a goofy thing that they put in here because somebody saw 2 episodes of Real Ghostbusters or Extreme Ghostbusters once and thought that this goofy idea was something to just bring this character in. No. So it would be okay if they brought this character back, but not as this fire demon guy. If they brought him back as some Ghostbuster thing somewhere down the road, I would be fine with that. But, like, really, his character, along with any other character, really had not enough to do here. Like, I guess he was to be brought in as comedic relief, but nothing landed funny to me or a single human soul that watched this film, I feel. So we have this one person who is holding on to this orb, this circular thing, and the firemen are going on and they're touching this circular thing. And I'm assuming that goes on to unleash this ghost upon them and kills all of the firemen, we have to naturally assume. I don't know. But yeah, but that's to me how this film opens. Then we go on to have uh, Gary, who of course is Paul Rudd, and Callie and Trevor and Phoebe. They're all in Ecto 1 driving off to chase this Hell's Kitchen ghost. Which, immediately when I saw this Hell Kitchen ghost, I'm like, isn't that a ripoff from the video game? Because in the Ghostbusters video game, there's a whole level where they have this kind of like Hell's Kitchen thing, and they have to go on to catch this chef. And there's a whole thing where whenever you would go further and further into this kitchen, you would get slapped with all this dead fish thing. Same thing as the video game. So they're kind of possibly stealing a lot of stuff from prior things and having it all connect in here and have it just be this one big massive Easter egg thing that you're hunting all these things down from all of these other things, if you're a die-hard Ghostbusters fan. So we come into having Phoebe being this teen angst rebellious character in this film. So whenever someone goes on to tell her not to do something, like, she has to do it because she's teen angst character. And then Paul Rudd's character has to come in and be more of a parent, more so than Callie is, because Callie doesn't do jack crap nothing in this movie, as well as a number of other characters. But for her, like, she is just there in this film as a background character, and she doesn't really have much of any lines in this movie besides her possibly having some sex joke with Paul Rudd, but that's about it. Like, she, out of all these characters, has nothing to do compared to maybe Afterlife, where she had a lot more to do because she kind of carries the film much more so than any of the others characters in that movie. Even though Phoebe, yeah. Anyways, so Trevor is to go on and tell us that he's 18 now, and he has to go on and consistently tell us that he's 18 now, and that he should be driving the Ecto 1, because 18. Probably doesn't even have a license, Lisa, but he's 18. So we have our characters scrambling to try to figure out how to catch this Hell's Kitchen ghost. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of very, like, reflectant on the other Afterlife film, where we have them much more so doing like these kind of chase kind of things, and I can enjoy this kind of scene here where we have Phoebe wanting to go on and open up the door so she can go on and have her seat pop out and have like the kind of the gun proton pack scene again, like she had in the other movie. Where of course Trevor mentions is like, well, hey, I can't open a window in this Ecto One, and like we can't put on the AC, and like everything in this Ecto One is starting to malfunction, as well as all this the sewer lids are flying all over and hitting all these other cars. It's a really cool, interesting opening scene. I liked it for what it was, even though it just reminded me of Afterlife, which I kind of just was like, yeah. Anyways, so we have Phoebe. She pops out. She blasts out the proton pack, the beam, and we're just like, okay, what good does that do when you don't have a ghost trap? Here's where we all of a sudden have the ghost traps come into play. We first have me again have the complaint of we have a motorized like ghost trap that's on four wheels that pops out of the Ecto One and is going much faster than a number of other cars in this road, which makes no sense to me. But here we are. And I'm like, wait a minute, like this ghost is flying in air. And how are you going to expect to have a ghost trap reach this thing? It makes no sense. And logically, it's like, oh, well, we had a plan for that. And I'm like, oh, okay, good. So we go on to have us realize that this four-wheel trap won't work, to then turn around and have this ghost trap that is coming from off of a drone. So I'm like, okay, all right, somebody thought of something. Finally, like we're upping our game here in the new tech of Ghostbusters. Like, really, I could have liked there to be more of there being like a containment unit on the Ecto One, because then that would kind of mitigate, or like that would kind of solve us having. Let me get it here. So this Frozen Empire has a huge deal about the containment unit in this movie. So much so that I'm just like, okay, I'm kind of getting so much nostalgia from the first Ghostbusters movie where they had to go on and they had to turn off the containment unit, which really just had that do the explosion, which released all the ghosts, which that's kind of what happens in this movie again, because we have to do that kind of again, because we've gone on to do that in a number of other Ghostbusters cartoon things, like the Halloween Door. If you've ever gone on and seen the Halloween Door episode of the Real Ghostbusters, it's kind of a huge deal for the Real Ghostbusters because it's a Halloween special. People sing and dance in that movie or that episode, but it's actually really good. Has a lot of ghosts in it. It's just a really good story. It's really fun for all to enjoy. So we could have had like a containment unit on to Ecto One, which honestly could have saved the fact that we could have had uh like when the whole transporting of the containment unit ghosts, like how much could that have just saved when they were talking about, oh yeah, if we can get all the ghosts from the other containment unit onto this one, like it's going to take us like 3 to 5 years to be able to do all of that. I'm like, man, if you could have just gone on and just transferred like some way. Anyways, moving on. So we don't have a containment unit on the Ecto One like we did in the video game. So like we're basically just effed here because technology and so on and so forth. But we can build a whole other uh aquarium wing somewhere in New York that has like a better containment unit as well as also just a ton of just better equipment, but we can't do anything else because the firehouse is just outdated, right? Man, if there's gonna be another Ghostbusters film, that firehouse better have some slamming tech, I tell you, or I am just going to be outraged. I don't know if I'm gonna like the. I don't know if I'm gonna like the next Ghostbusters film because immediately when I saw Frozen Empire, I'm like, oh my god, this is Let It Go, Frozen. This is stupid. But then I watched the movie and I'm like okay, I guess I can like bits and pieces of this film, whatever. It's at least it's better than Afterlife. So even though I can go on and probably still just not like this movie too and just be okay with it because I still have a number of other content that I can watch that's Ghostbusters related. Getting back to the film. So I'm sorry. I went on that tether and I couldn't stop. So we have the ghost trap drone that goes on to capture the Hell's Kitchen ghost. And then they, of course, go on to have a lot of damage being done via that happening. And so immediately we end up bringing Walter Peck back in, and he ends up being the mayor of this movie because we always have to have some politician who comes in and is to kind of be a part of this film, like in the very uh, like I think the mayor was kind of crucial in the other two films, as well as like his lackey character in the Ghostbusters 2. And so we had to have a whole brand new other mayor, which ends up being Walter Peck in this movie, which I was really just kind of happy that we had Walter Peck in this film because I was hoping that they would have him in this movie. Uh, really, it was cool to have him there, even though it was just to plug it nostalgia things. But yeah, like really, cool. Yeah, great. So we of course end up having Walter Peck talking to the Ghostbusters, and immediately we have him realize that Phoebe is far too young to be a Ghostbuster. It's like, I guess you can get a job at 16, but I guess you can't be a Ghostbuster until you're 18. Isn't that a little weird? What does she need to be 21 to be able to bust ghosts? Because Trevor definitely isn't old enough for that. And why is it that we didn't have a whole afterlife movie where Winston comes in and is like, well, wait a minute, guys, like she obviously can't bust ghosts because she's not young enough. And I know that because Walter Peck and whoever told me that. Like, did Winston not care? Like, I don't know. I guess they. Who cares? I guess like they probably figured with parental guidance there that they didn't need that kind of rule, but Walter Peck just needs to come up with some way to like mess with these Ghostbusters to try to get them out of business in some small way. He has to come up with some way to mess with them. And so we of course have Paul Rudd who's approaching the bench, and Walter Peck is like, "Well, hey, I'm not a judge." So like Paul Rudd and Walter Peck are talking, and we of course have Paul Rudd who's just like, "Well, I'm just her like substitute teacher. Like I'm not really her dad." Technically, because me and Callie had not gotten married. And so Walter Peck is just like, well, why am I even talking to you if you're not her legal guardian? I should actually be talking to her mother, which is right over there. But you have all the lines, Mr. Paul Rudd. So why am I even talking to you? So we of course have the parents going on and telling Phoebe, it's like, I'm sorry, but you can't be Ghostbuster, even though you really are the spangler of which that is to hold this entire film, and probably bust more ghosts, much more so than any of the other people, because you're just the better of everyone. Yeah, it, really, I wish that this was a team movie, but it's not. It's no longer that, and that is the most irritating thing of all of these newer films. So we go on to have Paul Rudd and we have Callie, who are to try to put in the new trap in the containment unit. And if anyone was to have gone on and remember the first film, we would go on to have Egon explain to the other Ghostbusters by having a Twinkie about the containment unit, to go on and possibly tell us at some point that the containment unit is going to be full. Uh, or to go on and explain about like the size of a Twinkie, that's a big Twinkie, that whole thing. So we have both Gary and Callie that are trying to go on and hold this ghost in this containment unit, but something's going awry with it. That all of a sudden we have all the gadgets and the gizmos or whatever that are on the containment unit are struggling to contain this one ghost. Because this ghost, of course, is to be kind of controlled or possessed by the Garaka, the frozen empire ghost. And so it's kind of struggling to be contained within the containment unit, to the point of the containment unit starting to malfunction and started to break and crackle. And the further and further we go into this film, the more that we start to see that the containment unit is close to bursting or breaking, and so on and so forth. The whole movie gets containment unit, just it's its own like little story in this movie. So we have Gary and we have Callie, and they're realizing that, okay, like there's something wrong with the containment unit. We have to have somebody look into it, and we have to figure out who are we gonna call. The stupidest thing in this film is honestly when Paul Rudd goes into saying word for word the Ghostbusters theme song. That, I think, to me was a stupid part in the trailer that they of course ended up also putting in the film, and it was just stupid how he goes on, he's like, honey, busting makes me feel good. When something's strange in your neighborhood, who you gonna call? And he goes into all that. I'm like, that is the stupidest thing in this film, and they put it in the trailer. uh and really, it's not funny to me. I thought it was stupid. Uh, we also even get a point where there's like a TV rolling where it showcases the Ghostbusters cereal, and it kind of has some random scenes from the original Ghostbusters movie, kind of reflecting on the past as well as bringing up the newer crew. Like I thought that that little kind of thing there was kind of fun to kind of reflect on like the Ghostbusters past, as well as also bringing up the Ray Parker music video and so on and so forth, and that little Easter egg like thing. But so, anyways, we have Gary, who of course Paul Rudd is talking to Melnitz, Janine, and she of course is just like, well, like we're gonna have to go on and get Winston to just kind of figure this out and figure out who we can send here, and that ends up bringing out a character called Pinfield, who I immediately was thinking like, why can't this character be Oscar? This could have easily had us figure out where Oscar had been since Ghostbusters 2, but instead we're just bringing Lars Pinfield in as this gadget guy. And I'm like, what a wasted opportunity here, even though, like, it's kind of cool that we get this Pinfield character because he's this tech guy. But still, I'm like, where could have Oscar have been in this film? So many different places. No kidding. So Lars Pinfield comes in. He's bringing in his gadgets, and he is telling all the people, of course, Paul Rudd, who can't stop talking, to shut up so he can kind of listen to the gadgets to see if they make a noise and be able to figure out what's wrong with it. So this ultimately leads to them possibly thinking that they need to go on and realize that the containment unit is like outdated compared to their more recent equipment. So that eventually gets Winston to have all of our family crew make their way to this aquarium where he goes on and showcases this other containment unit that has a massive number of traps that can be put into this containment unit, as well as also reuniting us with Lucky, who is the girl from the other Afterlife film, and to kind of tell us where she is now, where she no longer is working at that one uh, diner or whatever she was in the other film, but now she is this tech girl that is working alongside Winston and his tech crew. And so I'm like, okay, like this is like this whole tech thing and these cursed objects were really cool. I loved this part of the movie. And if at some point they wanted to go on and like try to make a whole like tourist attraction out of that, like that would be cool too. As well as they try to make it fairly similar to the other film. We also come to find that they had figured out some way to make certain rooms have certain ghosts within them, but still kind of contain them in somewhat definitely. Because we realize that at some point, these people's tech in this aquarium is honestly crap. Like we really find that with the Frozen Empire ghost, Garaka, he can his character can just kind of come in and freeze all this equipment and it stops working. Even though he's in this orb, he still just has a lot of control of what's going on. Even though he's kind of trapped in this ghost trap, which is this orb looking thing. But this orb thing just isn't strong enough to completely contain Garaka, to where we have him kind of controlling all these other ghosts and possessing them and forcing them to do his bidding, even while still in this ghost trap orb, because they go on to explain in the later part of the film that there is to be some ancestry of Ghostbusters where someone had gone on to find this circular orb thing to trap Garaka in. And I was like, okay, like, this is cool, like, telling me, like, the history of Ghostbusters. Like, would I want a whole nother film to go on and have these separate stories of all these other, like, history of Ghostbusters? I'm not exactly sure. But it could be fun. Like, if it's not uh like a boring film, like if they give me like little scenes of the past in one Ghostbusters movie, I could be fine with that. But I don't know if I want to have a whole movie where it's again like not 100% a Ghostbusters film. And I want there to be just more. I want a Ghostbusters film that should really just be them, like the first one, going to a number of odd jobs, but then realizing that there is a big monstrous thing at the end of the film that they have to go on and fight. This movie goes on and has like a bunch of side missions that have to do with something with a ghost, but it's not really busting it. So yeah, it is what it is. So with all of that said, we come to find that uh, before we get to the whole Winston gadgets stuff, we have Ray, who is to be doing this podcast YouTube thing with podcast, and because both podcast and Ray have become good friends, because Ray had stated in the Afterlife movie that he had seen podcast as videos, and he's probably the only one that's seen all X number of them. So we come to find that Ray is having people bring in possessed or cursed objects for him to go on and wave a PKE over to see if they are really cursed or not. And we come to find that some old lady brings in some watch, and Ray waves the PKE over it, and no ghost is to be coming from it. So Podcast goes and takes his hammer and smashes it, and we have a laughable moment, I guess. So we come to find that Ray, from him owning the Ray's occult that he still has, that I love that they're doing that continuity from the second movie, because of course Ray's occult had him giving Peter a book in the second film, and so we're continuing on that whole thing, which I loved. Ray goes on to eventually find a person who is trying to pawn this orb that we, of course, is to realize has this Frozen Empire ghost within it, and that is to be a guy named Nadim. Nadim is to go on in the later part of the film and to be this fire master character that no one likes. And again, if I haven't said this already, Nanjiani, if I am even pronouncing that right, I love this guy's stand up, but any of the movies that he does, just like I can just be okay with like the Uber movie that he did, but oh my god. And it's not his fault. It's whoever did these movies. It's all their fault. It's not him, it's them. Um because if anything, like he is a really good comedian, he is really good, but just not even in this movie. Like he has none of the lines, nothing is funny. Really, anything that he does here makes me just want to have him just be a Ghostbuster and not a guy who can move fire with his hands. He's basically Pyro from X-Men, or he's basically any number of Human Torch, or he's basically all of those characters. And a good portion of this movie, he's trying to control these powers once he figures out that he even has them, because he has other people needing to help him figure this out with him. Anyways, so Nadim goes on to try to hand over this orb to Ray, and Ray goes on to put a PKE meter over it and realizes, like, oh wow, like, this is kind of breaking my PKE meter. So, yeah, we're definitely going to buy this from you. Here's your money. Get out of here. We then oddly come to find out that Nadim has more mystery about him that he is leading on, and the Ghostbusters eventually have to come back to Nadim and find his place that he is held up in, to realize that there is a whole shrine of stuff that Nadim is holding. Because eventually we find out this guy is trying to sell all of these odd wares, and he's pawning all these items, and like this guy has a whole entire room, it seems, of just these odd items. But we also come to find that uh, he came into the orb via family, because like he inherited this orb from his mother. So we come to find that the Ghostbusters come back to Nadim's place to then take a PKE meter to all of his goofy uh, stuff. And then we come to find that bizarrely, there's a PKE meter going off on Nadim himself. So we're like, okay, Nadim is either possessed by a terror dog, like we had, of course, had been reminded by the first film, that, of course, Rick Moranis was to have been having a terror dog inside him in the early stages of the very first film, talking about a Schlor or whatever from the first movie, and then talking to horses, and the prisoners will be all escaped or whatever. The prisoners will be uh, uncaged or whatever he says in the when he's talking to the horse. The prisoners will be escaped. I don't remember exactly what he says. Um, but anyways, um, moving on. So Nadim comes back to have a psychological examination done by Peter Venkman. So I'm like, okay, here's where we bring Peter back. And I'm like, okay, like, what is he going to do in this film? Not much of anything, it seems, as well as a number of other characters. So Peter comes in and he starts throwing pens at Nadim, and this feels very much like R.I.P.D. if you've ever seen the Ryan Reynolds uh, Jeff Bridges movie. That will seem very similar to Frozen Empire, in all honesty. They even have their own like goofy sphere thing in that movie also, as well as there being a point where there's like an interrogation to figure out whether or not this person is a ghost or not. R.I.P.D. Check it out. So Peter is throwing pens at Nadim. Nadim is having to answer these bizarre questions coming from Peter about a baby being skinned or not. So Nadim is having some problems. And so while this is going on, there is a bizarre flame that is growing higher and higher, uh, coming from one of the tech science gadgets that are in one of the other rooms, having us starting to realize that Nadim must have some special ability, and he now has to figure out some way to use said ability. So they forcibly want him to at first try and go on and light a candle and try to figure out a way for him to control these things of fire, these things of flame, that eventually will help out Paul Rudd and Trevor later on in the film. So, speaking of Trevor, Trevor goes on to have a run in with Slimer. We come to find out that Trevor is to be living in some room that is having some mold upon the ceiling. and he is touching the ceiling. He's caressing the ceiling. He's just that ceiling. And come to find out, when Trevor is to be investigating the ceiling and putting his finger inside of it, he realizes that there is some green goop upon his finger that he doesn't like. And so Trevor realizes that there is something going on in the upper echelons of possibly attic of the firehouse, so he goes up there. Trevor goes on to find out that when he is to make his way into said attic, we come to find that there is this huge mound of sugary candy food stuff that is to act as some kind of weird, bizarre blanket for some ghostly thing. For any of you that have ever gone on and seen real Ghostbusters or extreme Ghostbusters, you could probably easily have figured who out this is. And for those of you who have gone on to see the movie, you know anyways. But still, we come to find out as Trevor is to move parts of the parchments of candy wrappers and so on and so forth, we find that this is none other than Slimer. We come to find out that this Slimer has much more slimmed down from the last time that you had possibly seen him from Ghostbusters 2. I don't remember if Slimer was in Afterlife or not, but if he was in Afterlife or not, I probably would not care anyways. And really, I think there are some things where they want to say that like Ghostbusters 2 like is not a movie that everyone saw. So like it doesn't have to be identical to Ghostbusters 2, it just has to be looking more like Ghostbusters 1 or whatever anyone's more familiar with. Moving on. So Trevor ends up getting slimed by Slimer. And so we really just have to realize that Trevor pretty much just becomes Peter Venkman in this film. We even get to a point where he is going on and setting up a trap for Slimer to fall into. And we then have to realize that, like, Trevor is even doing the Bill Murray Caddyshack, like, trying to, like, trap the gopher kind of thing in this film with Slimer, where Trevor goes on and is to gather all these Cheetos, and Slimer is to like, ooh, piece of candy, follow the trail, and make his way onto this trap. And so Trevor goes on and is to hope that it like, okay, Slimer is going to continue on to the trail to make it to the trap, but then Trevor ends up getting called away for some reason, and that ends up getting Slimer to then slime Trevor yet again, having us kind of this goofy fun between these two characters. So now that I'm just kind of covering whatever, because that's really what I'm doing here, we come to find, like, well, what is Phoebe doing? The character that has probably more screen time in this movie than any of the others because she has to. We have Phoebe who is getting told by her parents that she cannot go on and become a Ghostbuster because she has to wait 3 years to do so. I'm like, holy crap, if we're going to go on and have another Ghostbusters movie, I hope that spans like 3 years of time so Phoebe can just be a regular Ghostbuster and there's none of this, oh, she's too young, whatever. And I think actually the actress is actually 18 anyways, so it's not weird and or creepy anymore to think that Phoebe is to not be attractive because she technically is. And I guess Phoebe is somehow actually a fan of Ghostbusters, it seems, from pictures of which that people are to go on and to have posted somewhere that it seems that the actress who plays Phoebe is legitimately a Ghostbusters fan, whatever, what have you. So, but also we have to realize that a Griffin is to have gone on and been the first female Ghostbuster in Extreme Ghostbusters. Yeah, Kylie. Yeah, that show is good. If you didn't see it, you missed out. I thought it was a good show. A lot of people don't care for it, but Extreme Ghostbusters, that cartoon was so good. It actually had a handicapped uh, Ghostbuster in it named Garrett, and bizarrely, they never wanted to go on and put the action figure of Garrett because they thought it was too insensitive to have a wheelchaired character having an action figure. But I'm like, wait a minute, like we have Xavier from X-Men in all of his wheelchair glory, but nowadays we can't do Garrett from Extreme Ghostbusters. Years later, if anybody remembers that show, but I want a freaking action figure of Garrett because I have almost all the other ones. Yeah. Moving on. So somebody make me a custom Garrett action figure. I will be happy. Yeah. So we come to realize that Winston has Pinfield and all of the gadgetry that they have with the Lucky character, which I think is a stupid name, but how many other characters have stupid names in this movie? Podcast, that seems dumb, but he was in the other movie, so his name is still Podcast. We also come to find, so Phoebe, what is she doing in this film? Because I want a whole rant about Phoebe. So Phoebe is going on, and she is to be having chess with a ghost. And we come to find that this ghost is to be Melody. Because they have a whole sign that kind of flickers and it says Melody on it, so we have to assume that the ghost is named Melody. So Phoebe is with Melody, and it seems that they're starting to really relate to one another, even though this ghost was to have been uh, burned into a fire before she died. Her face melted off and all that jazz. And we come to find out that Phoebe has this match that'll be in real significance much more towards the end of the film, the last 30 to 20 minutes of it, because that's when uh, things really start to kick off. And the cool thing that I liked about Melody is we come to find that she has a dark side, and she's like Darth Vader. We find that it's like, well, she's obligated to be friends with Phoebe, but she also is working for Garaka. I was like, all right, this is cool. Like we have a ghost that is like just trying to like be like controlled by Garaka, because we come to find out that like all the other ghosts ends up getting controlled by Garaka, especially when Pinfield takes the orb against the Stay Puff little puffs, and all the puffs are like pushing their way against this glass to to want to touch the orb. So we come to find that Ray and Podcast have the little Stay Puffs from that they took, and so now like we just can't get rid of these stupid little Stay Puff Marshmallow Man, and we even have an end credit scene where like they steal this Stay Puff Marshmallow truck because like this thing eventually is going to be unstoppable, and I hope that they kind of re-put together this big, huge, massive Stay Puft Marshmallow Man thing that's threatening the city, because that would be cool in the next other film. So Phoebe is talking to Melody, and for every time she goes on and she tries to stubbornly want to be a Ghostbuster, then her parents are telling her not to, or to kind of just like stop being rebellious and whatever. The more Phoebe wants to run away and be with this ghost girl, which leads to Phoebe making her way down to the other aquarium room, where they not only had like that whole scene where like the gadgets were starting to malfunction and the possession ghost got out and was starting to go on to mops and all other kinds of things and was going from thing to thing to thing. We had Phoebe that goes on to make a ghost of herself, which I'm like, you know what? That's kind of a really bad thing to put in a film. Like, you're basically saying, or you're basically showing that Phoebe kind of ended herself so she could become a ghost to be with this girl. And I was kind of like, that's not a really good scene to have in to have in this movie. And like, that's just not a good thing. Moving on. So Phoebe becomes a ghost, and here is when Melody is to tell us like why it's important for Phoebe to have been a ghost. Because now Phoebe is seemingly under control of, or so Garaka is to control Phoebe, and so Phoebe, I guess, is the one thing that can go on and open up this orb and finally unleash the Frozen Empire ghost. While we go on and we have all the other characters busy trying to figure out Nadim, we also have Ray and Podcast making their way to this library, which of course we had seen in the other original Ghostbusters movie, where we have Ray and we have Podcast going and re-meeting up, well, especially Ray, re-meeting up with the Gray Lady, which, if you guys had gone on to see the video game, they do a whole story of the Gray Lady. It's actually really cool, and it's actually a really enjoyable story. And they go through the whole library thing, and it's really just an awesome part of that video game. But they make a whole big deal about her in the video game, and so it's kind of cool to re-see her here, where she's shh, and she scares Ray again. Like, of course, in the very first movie, where he's like, get her. Yeah, doesn't quite work out when you don't have a ghost trap or proton stream. So Ray and Podcast are making their way to this library, and the library administrator is wanting them to not come to this library because he had banned them. But the Gray Lady is still there. The Gray Lady is still there. Like, you could have gone on and captured this ghost finally, and had probably this administrator just be even happy that you were there. But I digress. So we have Patton Oswalt come in, and he is this guy who is to be able to figure out this dead language that Garaka is consistently speaking. And Patton Oswalt goes on to tell eventually the Ray and Podcast the whole backstory of the Garaka character, and tells us about this like old-fashioned way of having this orb thing, this circular orb thing, being this ghost trap. It's like, okay, like we have a whole like ancestry of Ghostbusters. Like, wow, this is cool. So I'm like, okay, this is gonna be completely quickly forgettable. A lot of this movie is quickly forgettable. Luckily, I can remember half of this to go on and say anything for this spoiler review. So, like, we go on to have Patton Oswalt, who has this whole, like, old fashioned recording, and he's saying it's like, well, yeah, like we can put this on this little thing, this little piece, and kind of spin it, and like, and you'll get to know more about Garaka. Well, all of a sudden we have the possession ghost who starts bouncing through all these items, and he goes on to get this trash bag and put this over this thing and runs off with it. So we're like, okay, like this is gonna be like this chase sequence. Okay, this is cool. And really, in the trailer, we come to find out that the lion is to be a ghost in this movie, but of course, in the trailer, we don't understand why. So we come to find that the garbage bag is right next to the lion, and Ray and Patton Oswalt are trying to get a foot and whatever to try to get to this thing. And then we come to find out that the lion, as this statue, is growling at Ray, having Ray fall backwards, and then go on to possibly have this lion start attacking the Ghostbusters. We come to find out that Ray had brought in the Ecto C, which is to be this ecto motorcycle, which kind of much more reminds me a lot of the Blues Brothers, much more so than does like a Ghostbusters piece of equipment. But moving on. So Phoebe and Podcast are trying to figure out this Ecto C cycle and what buttons to push to have this thing work for the proton pack. They're pushing every single button because they have no clue what to push. And this ends up having the little sidecar like throw out this proton wand, and Phoebe starts blasting away, even though the wand, it seems, is not working perfectly. They're trying to hit all the buttons and figure it out. So luckily Phoebe is able to just blast uh the lion and just destroy it, I believe. But then we later find in the movie, when they kind of cue the library scene yet again, that the lion is still there. So it's like, wait a minute, like did they just have another spare lion somewhere around, or like what's the story there? It must be easily replaceable. But again, once they destroy that lion, that goes on and brings Walter Peck in with the damage list and the cost and whatever, what have you. And that one lion is to, of course, bring in tons and tons of people into that library. So we have Walter Peck again looking at Phoebe, and it's like, well, hey, you were part of that whole ghost busting scenario, so like I have no problem but then to have the Ghostbusters be out of business, to go on and take all of your equipment, melt it all down, so on, so forth. So we have our Ghostbusters coming back to an empty firehouse that does not have seemingly any proton packs, but Phoebe had kind of snuck away one proton pack from this kind of hidden area, so like we're still going here. So we have Phoebe that goes on, and here's where she runs off to Melody and becomes the whole ghost thing, and then realizes that she had been swindled by Melody, and realize what a big bad mistake that she had gone on and done. As well as it seems that that whole aquarium thing with uh with Pinfield when he goes on to try and take the orb and tries to unleash the ghost, but that ends up going on to uh, kind of freeze up all the other pieces of equipment in there and starts unleashing some of the ghosts in there. And I don't think I clearly. For those of you that haven't gone on and seen the movie, there's a whole other place where Winston has all this equipment. We have this apparatus that is to act as a containment unit of sorts, as well as there legitimately being a. So let me explain. So we have a cursed object that goes into one uh con, like containment thing that ends up getting sucked up into eventually going into a containment unit. And so we come to find that Phoebe is to realize if she goes into one of these container things and she can unalive herself and become a ghost in this other part of this thing, but doesn't go on swiftly into this container unit thing. The whole gadget crap is just hard to just explain. You would have to see the film. It's just what it is what it is. So Phoebe goes on and unalives herself to become this ghost, but then she touches this orb, and that unleashes the frozen Empire ghost, the Garaka. So now we have to go on and have the huge battle that is 20 to 30 minutes left of the film because I don't think I can know anything else that is really worthy to talk about. Like there is a scene where Ray and Winston are kind of like having their own moment where Winston is telling Ray, it's like, well, hey man, like we can't go on and continue being a Ghostbuster anymore. Like we're really just living like our golden years and we just kind of have to uh like we're in the twilight of our lives and this and that and like we really have to kind of pick and choose like our battles, so to speak. So speaking of battles, Frozen Empire Ghost ends up getting unleashed, which then turns around and has the Frozen Empire Ghost finding the containment unit after realizing that it cannot go on and find Nadim, the Fire Master. At one point, we even have the Garaka who goes to this cigarette place or this weed place or whatever, and it's called Fire Master. It's like, are you the Fire Master? And the guy's like, yeah. So he kills him, and it's not really Nadim. So he then goes on to find Nadim's apartment just to get his horns to be placed upon his head that were within that apartment. So the Frozen Empire ghost makes his way to the firehouse to then unleash all the ghosts from the containment unit, and that containment unit also has like a huge crack in it for some goofy reason. We come to find that when all of the Ghostbusters get together within the firehouse to face off against the Frozen Empire ghost, I'm just like, okay, all right, this is cool. And here's where we start to get like the possessed ghost that comes into play, where he comes in and he goes into one of the proton packs that Lucky has, and like this is a really cool like battle here where like Trevor is trying to help Lucky, but he also doesn't want to get blasted by the proton pack. Paul Rudd wants to run in and try to save Trevor from the blast, but we come to find out that Nadim is saving Paul Rudd from being blasted by the proton pack by redirecting the beam with his ability. So not only does Nadim have the ability to control fire, but he also can control these proton blasts. How that ends up working into the movie, it doesn't really go that far, which I thought was stupid. They could have done something with that, but that's all they really do. So we then come to find that the Ghostbusters are all face to face with the Frozen Empire ghost. They're all at the bottom of the firehouse, and we're thinking, like, okay, here is the showdown. Like, we're going to have all the Ghostbusters just blast this thing and trap it, and it's going to be great. Well, what ends up happening is all the Ghostbusters are firing their proton packs, and we come to find that the Frozen Empire ghost, like even a proton pack blast or proton wand blast, like isn't good enough. We come to find out that Karaka just takes their beams and freezes them, and the beams fall and it shatters, which I think is a really cool effect. But I also just realized that, like, why is it that Phoebe's wand blasts were just better than anyone else's? That was kind of stupid to me. But we also had Phoebe, who had a whole thing where she had to take all of this copper out of the fire pole and her proton pack and have that somehow work in her favor. To have this other proton pack blasting away at Garaka. So, while all of the other Ghostbusters besides Phoebe end up all getting frozen, seemingly not to death like anyone other than a Ghostbuster would, it seems, in this film, Phoebe is running off to make her way to find Melody. Melody is to have this one match that she is to go on and eventually give up to Nadim, because she is going to light this match and Nadim is going to use it to have his fire be able to use as a proton kind of stream against the Frozen Empire ghost. And Phoebe is to grab her proton pack and blast against the Frozen Empire ghost also. And then that bizarrely, I guess, because of the heat of both of those things, that quickly unfreezes all of the other Ghostbusters for them to come up with a plan of figuring out what the heck to do. We also had, like how the trailer covers, how the Frozen Empire ghost freezes all of New York to the point of the whole cool summer thing plays in the trailer of the Ghostbusters thing, and it looked like a commercial of some drug that I was just waiting for it to pop up. I didn't know it was a Ghostbusters trailer, because it just seems like a drug ad from something. So that, I think, was like really cool to do all that, but then also like there are so many things that I'm like, why can't this Ghostbusters movie be a Ghostbusters film? Why do we have to spend so much freaking money on stuff that kind of just feels pointless to have put money in? Because when finding out how much this movie was like 100 million or something, and it's number one in the box office right now because there's nothing else out. And I'm thinking in my brain, I'm like, you could have spent money on actually doing Ghostbuster stuff. Like, you could have had like another whole thing where you're chasing off some other ghost that barely has anything to do with the actual story, but it's just a fun little side mission thing, but they didn't do that. So the Melody, they ended up having Phoebe chase off Melody again in that whole diner scene, and uh, Phoebe's proton wand accidentally goes off in the whole diner, and like I thought that scene was just kind of interesting, even though really it just has us realize that Phoebe is not going to attack Melody. But so all the other Ghostbusters are trying to figure out the plan of how to take down Frozen Empire Ghost. So Ray comes up with this magical plan of using the containment unit to trap said ghost. So I'm like, okay, like it seems that Garaka is way too powerful to easily be contained within this containment unit, but whatever story purposes, right? So Ray ends up having this cracked containment unit, have all of the ghosts, I'm assuming, come back into it, with the exclusion of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, Slimer, and probably any number of whoever other ghosts that Graka probably got released. But I guess maybe Graka went into the containment unit and it was all great afterwards. So that's how they end up like taking down this one ghost, and I was like, okay, it's kind of weak, but like whatever these gadgets just have to be to beat these ghosts or trap them or whatever, that's just what they have to be for this film. We have so many things that I would probably go on and want to just complain about, and that has to be one of them. But anyway, moving on. So ghost defeated, whoop de doo. They go on and they go outside of the firehouse, and we have Walter Peck, who is upset because of all the damage that this Frozen Empire ghost had caused. And we have Winston, who's going on and stating, it's like, well, hey, we saved the day yet again. We saved the world. And because we're the Ghostbusters. And everybody's like, yeah, all right, high five. And like that's how we're kind of wrapping up the film, with us realizing that like Phoebe, no matter what she did in this film, she was never going to get disciplined by her parents. And we just really have to have us go on and wait 3 more years for Phoebe to legit become another Ghostbuster, which I hope they just quickly just get to where she's 18, because she's the big focus of these films anyways. But yeah, so that's the wrapping up of this movie. Really, we have the end credit scene where the Stay Puft Marshmallow Men go on to steal that truck, but that's really about it. That's all I really care about mentioning. There's, if anything, I went all over the place with this review, and in all honesty, this movie goes all over the place. Uh, if anything, really, for those of you who kind of waited every single minute for me talking about all this whole entire film, I would really recommend going and seeing the movie rather than hearing every single spoiler that I had and how I felt about every little bit of it. There was no real Dana Barrett in this movie. There was maybe a little Easter egg somewhere in some scene somewhere, but like if you paused quick enough, you could have maybe seen it, but who cares? Uh, what I would like to go on in future Ghostbusters movies, if they continue to keep shoveling these movies out, because it seems like they're going to, whether they have a good story or not, it doesn't really matter. They just have to keep doing them. Uh, definitely wait 3 years for Phoebe to be much older. Really, where is Oscar? Is my massive question. I want to see that character in the other film. Give me Oscar. You don't give me Oscar, I'm gonna be ticked. Other than that, I don't really want to see Dana suiting up. I don't want to see her like being a Ghostbuster, but it would kind of be cool if she's involved in the other film. Uh, I would have liked, honestly, if they would have brought back Vigo the Carpathian somehow. That would have been cool. Like we have the comic books that kind of brought back Yanish and had some story about like the paintings and stuff like that. Like that would probably really be ripping off the comic books, but I think that was actually a really good story. That was really interesting. Um, I don't think that people would really want to go on and see yet another Ghostbusters movie where there's like ghost paintings or paintings that kind of bring things back to life or whatever. But with how goofy that this villain was and all the stuff that they were trying in this film, I think there was a lot of goofy ideas that all just had to make sense eventually by the way that the story ended. So final thoughts. I think there are a ton of Ghostbusters fans that are actually celebrities and actresses and actors and whatever that I think are still not getting involved in this film, and I wish that they kind of were. Because there was obviously Alyssa Milano that said that she somehow wanted to get involved with these movies, but she was involved in the video game, so I guess that was good enough. There are several other actresses that also came out and said that they were big fans of Ghostbusters, but it just seems that they're not going to get involved in any of these films for whatever goofy reason. That's kind of disappointing to me. But they would honestly just put one Ghostbusters movie that just felt like the first film. And I mean this by like not copying and not giving me Gozer again for for a third time. For the love of God, no. I would just say like I want there to be more ghost busting side missions and then they're having like this big threat at the end. Maybe all of these little side ghost things connect with the main ghost by the end. And I think there were a lot of real Ghostbusters episodes that did that perfectly. And like, if they were really saying that they were trying to follow the pattern of the real Ghostbusters episodes, I'm like, we really would have me say it's like, what episodes did they watch? Because I'm like, man, you guys clearly didn't do enough homework. Because this movie was all over the place with a bunch of crap, with a bunch of stuff. Uh, that really I could say as my final thing, my final. Uh, I like where these movies are heading, but it's on a short leash. I can be bored by these films that have come out more recently, and I would like to enjoy these films more. I would like to feel that I don't want to take a nap during any number of these films in the future. But I also have a feeling that they're going to make another one because this was number one in box office. So hope for the best. Other than that, I'm going to get out of here because I feel like I'm just ranting. And I'm also saying it kind of when I kind of get to the same kind of stuff over and over and over again, I apologize. But yeah, I'm also kind of tired, and I also want to go to bed soon because I'm doing this during the time of which that I would probably go to bed because this movie also just kind of tired me out because it's boring. But yeah, that's it. I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.